Hello everyone and welcome to Azam Sharp Weekly. In this video I'm going to show you that how you can perform pagination in your list control which is created using SwiftUI. This means that we might have 100 or 1000 records, but we only want to show you 20 or 10 records at a time. Then the user can press the next button and the next 10 records will be loaded and displayed in a list control. But for this to work, we would also have some sort of a service that actually does return you those records. I have implemented a service in NodeJS and it's hosted on Glitch. Let's go ahead and first check out how the service actually works. You can see that all of the service basically is doing is creating an array of 100 elements, which is user 1, user 2, and so on, and simply slicing up whichever query string that you pass in and returning you 20 elements per page. Let's go ahead and see then how it works. I'm going to go and change URL, pass in users, and I'm just going to ask for page number 1. As soon as I ask for page number 1, this is the array that is getting returned. You can see that it's an object which has a name, which has user 0, and the last one is user 19. So 0 to 19 is actually 20 elements are being returned. Let me go and change the URL by passing in a query string of 3. And now you can see the user from 40 to 59 is being returned, and so on. In other words, if you change the page number, it's going to calculate and give you a slice of that particular array, which basically represent that particular page number. This is hosted already, so we can actually go ahead and consume this and use it in our code. The first thing I need to do is I need to create some sort of a web service so I can communicate with the code, the NodeJS code that I typed in. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Swift file. And this will be simply a web service, which you have already done multiple number of times, hopefully. So let's go ahead and create a file. The web service is going to actually map the data that is returned from the web service, which is just JSON, into some sort of a user object. We don't really have that user object, so let's go ahead and add a new file and create that particular user class. Let's go ahead and create it. There we go. The user class will be very, very simple. All we will have is some sort of a structure, which is user decodable, because we are going to decode it. If you look at the result, the JSON that is being returned, the only thing we're getting is actually the name. That's the only property. So we'll simply go ahead and create a name property. That's it. Now we can go back to our web service and create the implementation to decode all of that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and create a web service. And inside the web service, I'm going to go ahead and create a fetch function. Now we have already done that numerous number of times, so I'm just going to copy paste the function. In the fetch users, you're going to pass in the page number that you want, and it is going to give you a closure which contains all the users as an array for that particular page number. We're going to create a URL which is based on the URL that I have already shown you, which is actually this one. In this, we're simply going to insert the page number and perform the request using URL session shared.data task. Once we will get all the users, we will simply go ahead and call the completion, which in our case is our closure, passing in the users to the caller. Don't forget to call resume, or else your URL session or your networking request is never being sent. Another thing you need to set up is the Nsf Transport Security, which you need to set up in info.plist. So let me go ahead and do that. And inside over here, you can actually set the domains, but right now I'm just going to say allow arbitrary loads, and I'm just going to put the value yes. Great. The next step would be to create some sort of a view model. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I will call that file a user view model. User view model. The user view model will be responsible for providing data to the screen for which will display the users. So I'm going to go ahead and create a class called user list view model, which will be an observable object. Great. It will have access to a published var users, which is an array of user. In the initializer, we can actually go ahead and create the web service. Or we can call the web service.fetch users, passing in the page number, which we can simply pass in initially 1. And for the completion, once we get to the completion, it will going to pass us the users. And we can do a dispatch.main.async and set self.users equals to users. Most probably we don't really have to do this hopefully dispatch, because this users is actually called in the dispatch. So we can try to ignore this for now and see if it works or not. Because if you remember correctly, in the web service, we are actually calling the closure on the main thread anyways. Now let's go ahead and create another function. We'll call it next page, which will be page, and you're going to pass in the index. And you'll do a similar thing over here also. So in this case, it will be web service dot fetch users page number, which is page, and it's again going to fire a completion, which is going to give you the users, and then we can do self.users equals to users. Let's go ahead and build that. Since this is going to call on a background, we can actually go ahead and add a weak self over here. Let's go ahead and build that now. And same thing for the next page function. We don't really want it to retain a reference, so make sure that you're calling it with weak. And that's pretty much it. Now we can actually go to our content view and start implementing this. So let's go to the content view. The content view currently simply shows a hello world, which is the default implementation. The first thing we need is we need to get the observe object. So we're just going to call it observed object, which will be var user list view model, which will be user list view model. Next, we can actually go ahead and create a state property, which will be a private var page, and we will initialize it to 1. In order to add the buttons, you have multiple choices where to add the buttons. But first, let's go ahead and add a list. We'll call a list, and we'll use a for each to run through the list. Self.user.listViewModel.users, and for the ID, we're simply going to use the name property, which is of the user itself. Then we can say users in text and then user.name. Please note one thing, that right now, if you look at the user view model, you're simply returning the users itself, which is not really a 100% good idea, because if it's a user view model, you should be returning, or user list view model, you should be returning a user view model, which will represent a particular user. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and create a class, which will be a user view model. And in order to initialize the user view model, we're going to pass in a particular user. When we do pass in the user, we're simply going to assign it to a user. So user, which is over here, which is of type user, and we're going to assign it to user. Now, in order to access the property, we're going to create a title property, which is a string, and which will simply return self.user.name, which in this case will be a name property. So let's go ahead and change that also. Now, one thing to note over here is that we will not really be returning users, which is a domain object, but we'll be returning a user view model. This means that when we actually do get the users over here, we can actually map through it and assign the users view model to users. So we can actually go ahead and say map and then calling user view model.init. Let's go ahead and build that. The same will be true for the other one also, which is the next page function. So users.map and calling the user view model.init. This is going to make sure that your application is not exposing domain objects or your model objects onto the view, but it is only exposing the view model onto the view. Let's go back to our content view and work with that now. So the first thing to note over here is that we have this a user view model, or you can say view model for short. So view model.name. Let's go ahead and see that if it actually displays us all the names or not. I'm going to go ahead and open up the canvas, and hopefully we'll be able to see at least 10 or 20 names, whatever is being returned from the server. So let's go ahead and run it. If everything is working correctly, we should be able to retrieve some names, some users, as you can see, 20 users, and getting it displayed on the screen. That's great. The next step is to add the navigation view or some sort of a button that will allow us to go next and previous. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap our list into a navigation view. Let's call it navigation view and simply go ahead and wrap the whole list into navigation view. You're going to see there's a space now on the top of the list, which is indicating that the navigation view has been added. That's great. Now we can actually go ahead and start adding some sort of title or some sort of controls to the navigation bar. So navigation bar items, and we can actually add the leading item, which in this case is this one. And for the leading item, I'm simply going to add a button. This button is going to simply say previous, and it will have a button click. Now you can see over here on the top left-hand corner that we have a previous button. We can also use the same technique to add the other button, which in this case would be the trailing button. So you can see, first of all, we have a leading button over here, but this is only one part of it. We can actually add a comma and add the trailing also. And for the trailing, we are also going to use a button, and we're going to say this is the next button. Sometimes it can take a while for the button to appear, but this time you can see that the button is actually appearing. The question is, what should you do when you actually click the button? So this is basically the code for the previous button, and you will type the code over here for the next button. If you look at your user view model, you only have the next page, and you don't really have the previous page. Although you can use the previous page also, just passing in the negative or a separate page -1. I'm just going to create a separate function just to make it a little bit more clear, but this is completely up to you if you want to use a single one or not. So now we are passing in the page number. Both of them are actually same. They're not really doing anything differently, but just for clarification, I created two different functions. Let's go back to our content view. For the next one, we are simply going to go ahead and say self.page plus equals to 1, and then self.user list view model dot next page and passing in self.page. Great. For the previous page, it will be the same thing also. So self.page minus equals to 1 and self.user list view model dot next page. And you can see the code for that is exactly the same. The only reason I created next page and the previous page, so this one will be the previous, is to just add a little bit more clarity for you, but you can use the same exact function. Okay, that's great. Now let's go ahead and build our application and go ahead and run it and see how it actually looks like when we actually press the previous and the next buttons. So I'm going to press the play button so that it loads everything. And there we go. You can see that it only loads the first 20 starting from 0 to 19. I'm going to press the next button and now it actually did load from 20 to 39. Now keep in mind that whenever you press the next button or the previous button, it is actually going to make a request to the server, which is right over here, with the correct page number, and then going to return you those elements whichever page they are on. So if I press multiple times, it is going to make multiple requests. Now one other thing that you will notice is that if I'm on page number 1 over here, I still see previous, but there is no previous when I'm on page number 1. So we need to make sure that the previous button is not really displayed if, well, we are on page number 1. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and say over here that if self.page is greater than 1, then go ahead and display all of this information, which in this case will be the previous button. Let me actually go ahead and put it in the correct place. So if self.page is actually greater than 1, then go ahead and display the previous button. Else, in this case, if you are not, then what you're going to do is we are simply going to enter or return nil. Let's go ahead and build this information again, or build this page, and go ahead and press on resume. The first thing you will note is that the previous button is actually gone now. And I can press on the next, and as soon as I press next, the previous button appears. So this is a much nicer UI experience because there is no previous button. The only thing you can do is actually press next. And once you reach the page number, which is 1, well, you can't really go back from there. You can do the same exact thing for the next button, and that is your assignment to do. When you actually reach the end, which in this case is at 99, you shouldn't have the next button over here. So the question is, how would you implement that? And that's your assignment to do that. So in this particular video, you learned that how you can perform pagination using SwiftUI and also connecting it to a particular web service or web API that is going to be returning you some sort of a fake data based on the page number that you actually passed in. If you like this video and want to learn more about SwiftUI, then check out my Udemy course, SwiftUI Declarative Interfaces for any Apple device. This is around 9.5 hours of on-demand video, and I keep on adding new content as I learn more. Also, the course has been updated for Xcode 11 Beta 5, and whenever the new version of Xcode comes in, then I will update it, the whole course, for that. Let's check out some of the contents that you'll be learning. You'll see that you'll be learning about building list and navigation, state and binding, which is very important. And then, not only that, you're going to jump into MVVM design pattern and build a complete weather app using MVVM design pattern. You're also going to build a news application which is going to read news from a web API and display it on the screen using the MVVM design pattern. You're going to learn about how to build forms, how to build modals, even integration with the core data and integration with core ML. I'm also adding some recipes like how you can integrate camera with your SwiftUI application and how you can group data in SwiftUI list. So this is a lot of content, and I keep on adding new content as learn more and more about SwiftUI. You can also see this is the highest rated course on Udemy with more than 800 students and a 4.7 rating. Now here's the thing, go to the YouTube description and find a link, that's the first link for the SwiftUI course. Click on the link and you'll get the best discount. Please use the links that I'm providing in the YouTube description. That really helps me also, because if you use my coupon, I will be rewarded with more revenue. In other words, the bigger cut from the course, but you will get the best deals no matter what. Also, if you're interested in some other courses like blockchain, augmented reality, MVVM design pattern, and a little bit more advanced course, which is building real-world application for iOS, I have a lot of different courses which covers truly everything that you need to know how to become an iOS developer, even Firebase, MapKit, and so on. So thank you once again, and I really hope that you enjoy this video.